Hello, this is Megan Singh. I am excited to share with you today my project on embodied learning. I chose to do embodied learning because this is something that, as I was reading through our chapter this week, I realized that I have a huge disconnect with as a learner, as an adult, and I hope that you will see my growth throughout this week by watching this video. I want to start with a simple and brief definition of embodied learning. So, we learned this week that according to embodied learning theory, learning is not just a purely cognitive task, it is also connected to our body, and it is, in fact, inseparable from our body because we experience life and everything that we do through our body as a vessel, which is connected to our brain and everything else. So, we learn through physical movement, interaction with our environment, and it is also a highly emotional process. To better help myself and others understand the concept of embodied learning, I pulled out these three key ideas. First, I have a quote from our chapter of the week, which says that embodied learning is a unifying of the mind and body. It means that learning cannot be a purely cognitive task. It does not take place only in our brain or in our mind, but we experience life through our bodies, and therefore learning is part of a body process. It also said that embodied learning has a strong emotional feeling or dimension. So often, embodied learning activities involve emotions, but that also helps strengthen memories that are associated with embodied learning activities. And lastly, this theory is not just for traditionally physical topics. So while it might be easy to think of embodied learning in the examples of playing basketball or soccer or dancing, these opportunities are not the only ones that are available to us through embodied learning. And so I will give some specific concrete examples later on. Before I get into some of the further details about what this type of learning can look like, I wanted to go back to that personal reflection that I mentioned earlier during the introduction. I have always been uncomfortable with the idea of embodied learning, even though I didn't look at it like that. I was never athletic. I, in fact, refer to myself quite often as being unathletic or ungraceful or unartistic, all of these words that I then would put in contrast with other parts of my identity, which I would consider to be studious or bookish or nerdy. And so that kind of shows that I had inside of my brain these two separate buckets, one that is like things that I do with my body, expressions for that are made with my body, and then ones that are made with my brain. And I thought I was really good at one and really bad at the other. And that shows a bit of an internalized idea of what I thought intelligence is, which I believe is a reflection of the education system that I grew up in. And I will describe a little bit of that more here in just a second. So, in Western education, we see that there are more opportunities for embodied learning or physical learning or learning through play when we are younger than there are when we are older. And so at the beginning of life, we can be seen, playing musical instruments or playing with blocks, learning through creative activities or playing with little people in little villages and cars, building snowmen or participating in plays. These are all activities that are really common in childhood education or in the classrooms that I teach in today. Children are often given brain breaks where they're able to stretch and jump around and move their bodies. And then later in life, as I will show on the next slide, learning looks a little bit different. So, as we are in kindergarten and first grade, we start to have this separation between what is play and what is learning. So, when we're learning, we are supposed to be sitting still, keeping our hands to ourselves, paying attention, and recognizing our personal space, which is very limited. And a lot of the time, this looks like independent work, reading books, or being on computers. And a lot of those activities are the ones that stick into adulthood. Unless you are a more creative or more adventurous or more athletic adult, most of the time your learning activities look a lot like the ones in the image here. And notice that these are stagnant, whereas the other ones before were including more movement. So Merriam and Baumgartner had a few ideas as to where this disconnect comes from. First one is a rejection of the body. It really caught my attention that one of the proposed ideas as to where this rejection of the body comes from is this idea that the body is a perpetual reminder of death, and therefore we don't talk about it or learn through it as much as we begin to age. And then perceived superior status of abstract thinking is something very common in Western education. And this is something I definitely experienced growing up, where play and movement was considered a break, like I mentioned before. We were not necessarily encouraged to learn by moving our bodies or using multisensory movement, which is actually more common nowadays in schools, for especially for foundational literacy practices. But now we also have embarrassment with our bodies as we grow older, especially in our teenage years and young adult years. And as that embarrassment starts, where it's even kind of awkward to walk up to the front of the uh like the class to do something on the whiteboard, that just doesn't really go away, or we don't challenge that perspective a lot in classrooms. And so those habits stick in our education as we grow into adulthood. So now I'm going to share some ways that teachers can create an environment and embed activities into the classroom that use embodied learning as a foundation, or at least as supplemental to what we normally do. And so first, that starts with the role of the teacher, meaning that teachers should incorporate kinesthetic and somatic activities so that students can have that experience of learning with and through their bodies. And I will give some specific examples of what that can look like in an adult education context in a moment. Next, instructors should directly to name the connection between the mind, body, and learning experiences. It should not be something that is just inductively learned. I believe that we should be stating outright, this is the connection, your experiences are valid, and your knowledge, your gut instincts, all of these things are important to learning and your knowledge base. So first, I have some examples of activities that are possible for adult learners in any context. Some of these are things that I've tried in my own classes or other ideas that I've heard about from some of my colleagues over the last few days when talking about embodied learning. First, I have total physical response to teach vocabulary. So this would be, for example, with English language learners, you might say that one of your vocabulary words is brush your hair. And so then you would have an activity that's like about brushing your hair that they're practicing. I use this a lot with parts of the body when students are learning, like maybe you'll do Simon Says and it's touch your head, touch your ears, those types of activities so that students can move their body in reference to the vocabulary. Next, students can do little plays to represent scenes in a novel. So that'll look like maybe choosing a novel that isn't written as a play, but students still work together to turn it into a little bit of a play, and one that involves not just dialogue but movement as well. Next would be somatic awareness and meditation. So, if you are teaching a class that includes meditation, you would ask students to close their eyes and then become aware of different parts of their body, different sensations, and different senses. Next is called a tableau. If you've never heard of this, this is where you use your body to create a scene. I actually think it was mentioned in the chapter, but it's not a super common practice. But it might be good to do like for a team dynamic in a workplace training. So you would say you work together as a team to create a tableau that represents your team dynamic. And so then the adults would have to use their bodies to create some type of image, like a standing image that would represent their team dynamic. And then lastly, our step in, step out activities, such as during an anti discrimination training. So you might ask people to stand on a line and step in if they have experienced some type of specific discrimination based on XYZ. And this is common practice for anti discrimination training, just for people to become aware of their own privilege, but it also requires, often in all of these examples, uh, a sincere comfort in the group that you are working in, especially because we have these feelings as adults that our bodies are weird places to be, and so we have to have a strong relationship with our groups if we are going to use embodied learning. Next, I have some more ideas that are specific to health literacy. I chose this because my projects this semester have been focused on health literacy topics, which is what my adult English learners have been working on in class lately. So, first, we have role playing doctor and patient scenarios. So, this would need to include body movement, not just dialogue, but for example, practicing what it is like to have your blood drawn um, would be an example of one of those role playing options. Or learning anatomy through touch and massage, where you have to touch your body, like that total physical response. Or giving an assignment where they should go home and give a massage to somebody in the household, where they have to name the different parts of the body as they are touching. Next is practicing how to relax tensed muscles when stressed. So that includes that very strong concept between mind and body, right? So you are cognitively naming which muscle and how you are relaxing it when you are stressed. Next is a four corners activity to demonstrate opinions on sleep habits. So one corner might be I need 6+ hours of sleep in order to feel healthy. Another corner of the room might be I do not need a specific amount of sleep to feel healthy. Another corner might be I think naps are a horrible idea. And basically, students would just go to a different corner of the room based on their opinions. And then lastly, I have attending a cooking class during a nutrition unit as an option. I'm trying actually to do this for my class now, but this is an idea that allows students to use their body and use the knowledge that they already have, but built in with what they are learning about with nutrition. So now I just want to close out with a summary of what I've talked about today. Embodied learning recognizes and honors the body's role in the learning process. Traditionally, Western education usually identifies the mind as the place of learning, and that's taught to children as early as kindergarten when we have recess that is considered to be the break, and it is juxtaposed against the rest of the day, which is to be for learning. Next, embodied learning is strongly connected to emotions, and when emotions are present, it supports the learning process. And lastly, teachers can integrate embodied learning activities into courses of any discipline. It is not just for sports or for the arts, it is for everyone. I have only listed the textbook as a reference this week. However, because of this project, I had incredible conversations with my colleagues about embodied learning experiences as both learners and educators. And I look forward to becoming a more well rounded educator and incorporating embodied learning practices into my work as a teacher.